Welcome to Philanthropy SA. This is a podcast about and for the philanthropic community in San Antonio and South Texas. We introduce organizations and people who are making an impact in the community. Beneficent Financial is proud to sponsor this podcast, and it is our hope that you enjoy this conversation about the impact we can have. The goal is to edify and inspire. Now please join our host, Dan Rebman.
Hi, welcome to Philanthropy SA. I'm your host, Dan Rebman, and particularly pleased to be joined today by Becca Brune. She is the CEO of the Congregational Collective right here in San Antonio, and we're going to find out all about Congregational Collective, although if you've listened to past episodes, you probably heard a reference when we had David Rogers from the H.E. Butt Foundation talking about it, as this is one of the organizations that they have helped found and support. So both of my regular listeners will know that name, but glad you're here, Becca.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And we always like to start by talking about what brought people to San Antonio and kind of why you're here, and then what got you into the philanthropic or nonprofit helping others world.
Okay. Never say never. So I grew up in Austin. My father, though, was from San Antonio, deep West Side. So we'd come to San Antonio for Easter, Christmas, Thanksgiving, Fiesta. And all growing up, I'm like, I'm never going to live in San Antonio. I'm never going to live there. And so moved from Austin to San Antonio to go to Incarnate Word when it was a college, before it was the university, and graduated and left for New York, right? Went to Syracuse, the Maxwell School, to get my master's in public administration. And then I moved to New York City, and I lived there for 4 years, worked in the world of nonprofits. And my grandmother was ill. She had breast cancer, so came back to San Antonio. And that was about 30 years ago. The rest is history. I bought a house, got married, had kids, and so never say never, because here I am.
Never say never.
Most of my career actually started in city government, working for the Department of Community Initiatives here in San Antonio, but then just evolved into the world of philanthropy. I worked for United Way for 8 years. So always either straddled funding nonprofits and or working in partnership with nonprofits. And so it's no surprise that I've kind of come full circle and have the best of all worlds right now.
Very good. So you've got a lot of experience in the nonprofit world. I know you've been in government and done that sort of thing. So later on, we want to talk about where those intersect and help each other and all that. But before we get to that, tell us about the Congregational Collective and kind of how it formed and what it is that you do. Sure.
So the Congregational Collective is a newly seeded 501c3 by the H.E. Butt Foundation. The legacy of the Congregational Collective goes far, far back, way before me, starts with Howard Butt. And I know David talked a lot about the legacy and the family and the space of mental health and what it means, and deeply tied to its faith traditions. And so in 2017, the H.E. Butt Foundation, like most things they do, is very intentional, very research-driven, very collaborative in nature, started with a couple of studies. And the studies basically, leaned into this space and said, we know that faith communities, we know that congregations are addressing mental health, but, is that true and to what extent? And so they did a couple of studies. They hired UTSA, they hired the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute. One of them said, yes, faith communities are the go-to, and it is a place where individuals go before they go to a physician or provider for mental health and anxiety. And then the second study said, well, if it's happening, what does that look like here in San Antonio? And so Meadows did a taxonomy that basically took an inventory of the churches and congregations working here in San Antonio in this space. And then they compared that to some best practices across the nation. And then made some recommendations and said, if you're going to lean into the space, here's some things that work, here's some gaps, and here's an opportunity for the foundation to fill that gap. And then the Congregational Collective was born. And we started with a pilot, like most things that we do. And we started with 8 congregations. And essentially wanted to test out and prove out a model saying that, can we equip congregations to address the early intervention of mental health, anxiety, and depression? And can we begin to create partnerships between provider systems and nonprofits and congregations to do this work better? And so we've been on a quest and a journey for about 2.5 years now, and just recently grew that to another 18 congregations. We received a large grant from the John Templeton Foundation to be on the journey with us. It's a discovery and a learning journey to kind of come up with, best practices and a model of what that could look like. So yeah, that's what we do.
That's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah.
So in the course of getting everything, let's take a couple steps back here and talk about some of the reasons why churches and faith groups are the perfect place to do some of this, and then sometimes where they actually kind of hinder the ability to provide services in that space.
Sure. So as you can imagine, churches are oftentimes the broker of trust in community, right? And, we did a survey recently with our 8 congregations, and 80% of them said, I go to my clergy. I go to clergy leadership before I go to a mental health provider. And so they're the gatekeeper to trust. They're oftentimes a safe space. And the other challenge to that too is there's church hurt, right? There's, people who have gone to their clergy and their leadership before and have been told, hey, you don't have a problem. You just don't pray enough. So I think it comes with a mixed bag, right? There's the opportunity that, yes, people lean in and that's where they feel most comfortable to go. But oftentimes people have gone and it's not where they've received help, right? And so in this work, we've really had to address both. A big piece of what we do is we do some foundational training, which helps to address stigma and really takes a congregation where they're at and, helps create awareness, shared understanding, a shared language, a vision, right? A lot of this work is changing the culture of the church to be a safer space, right? A space where everybody can go and receive help. And it's less about leaning in about mental health. It's really well-being, right? It's a combination of how do you lean into what you value? And oftentimes it's your faith. So how do we create this intersection between mental well-being and helping people lean into their faith to be a part of that healing process?
And so what is it that you do with the churches to help equip them to be able to help provide these services and identify, what they need to be doing?
So one of the things that we do is, like I just shared with you, we do some foundational training. And so essentially each church begins with an assessment. They kind of figure out, okay, where are we at? And then we help them to figure out, well, what does that look like? And so there's a few tools that we use. They're evidence-based and also very much driven by biblical tradition, faith traditions. And so the language resonates, the relevance of talking about mental health and mental well-being. And so we do some foundational training, and that's not just a individual, but each individual or each church has a navigator, and the navigator, we work with them closely to put together a ministry team. And the idea of the ministry team is not to start up something new, a new program, but how do you lean into your existing infrastructure and ministries, your, let's say it's benevolence ministry, or let's say it's your Bible study classes. How do you lean into key leaders within the church to be part of an extender of this work, right? Ambassadors. And so again, it's not about a person or a ministry. It's how do you lean into the church and build a culture to support the work. And we do that through trainings. We do that through equipping with language and understanding. We with the churches that are part of the Templeton Foundation grant, the Tapestry of Care, we have a navigator, and each navigator in each congregation is, we give a stipend. So we give some resources that allow them to be able to do this work. And then they come to a series of monthly meetings. We have a learning circle, a learning community, so that they know they're not alone on the journey. And we're also learning with them, but they're learning together. And that's been magical. And interestingly enough, we're across all denominations. And so what's been really lovely is you've got someone who's Church of Christ that sits across the table and says, Becca, in a million years, I never thought I would be in a relationship with a Lutheran pastor. And so it's really been wonderful to watch the weaving together of different faith communities and faith traditions to really address mental health at its core.
Yeah, and because mental health knows no boundaries that way.
None.
So when I'm involved in some other projects, and the notion of ecumenical type, projects is something that appeals to me a great deal. And in terms of as you go through this process, what are the trends that you're seeing in terms of the issues that people are dealing with on the side? Do they tend to get lumped into categories, or what are the types of things that you're typically finding congregants are, in need of assistance with?
So it's really interesting. The lane or the space, so to speak, that we're in is around early intervention and prevention. And what we found across the board is we spend a lot of time trying to unpack, because I think everybody is prone, we're all prone as a society, as a delivery system, to address crisis. And so it's been really interesting to help reframe the issue that let's not wait until it's a crisis. Let's start with early intervention. And that looks different. That could just be companionship. That could be learning how to lean into somebody and say, you're having an upside down day. How do I have a conversation with you to identify what that critical risk factor is, right? And how do I just walk with you for a week or 2 weeks to upside your day, right? As opposed to, hey, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to say it. I'm not going to say anything, right? And then it just evolves into this state of crisis, whereas what we're really trying to help people do is companion with each other. How do you have conversations? How do you listen differently, right? And so I know that sounds really simple, but I just think as a society, we're so conditioned to focus on the crisis and not really focus on what's the critical risk factor that's creating, a bad day for someone. Maybe you put your parent in hospice. Maybe, your husband lost his job. Your kid's acting up in school. So how do we just lean into each other's lives and listen differently and have conversations differently?
Sure. And the notion of being upstream, right, which is what you're describing when you talk about getting involved before you hit the point of crisis. We know how much more efficiently services can be provided at a much lower cost, and just that the nature of why it's so important to go upstream. And again, I've had multiple guests in multiple areas of providing services that that's a recurring theme that you just hear over and over and over again. The question then becomes, when is it okay to say to somebody, hey, do you need somebody to talk to? Or kind of what's, when you're seeing some of those early warning signs, how do you do that without causing them to say, oh, what? I'm no, I'm not. I don't need that. I'm okay.
Yeah. So one of two things to that question. One is I just want to reassure everyone that part of what we also do in the training is the PHQ-2 and train on the PHQ-2 and the PHQ-9, which is it's a health questionnaire, right? Where, someone kind of self-identifies, right, by answering a list of questions. So in some ways you're helping them to self-diagnose, right? And depending on where they score on that, it does a couple of things. It allows the navigator the safe space to say, hey, you know what? This is beyond my ability, which is why we have created these relationships with provider networks and community, because we do want to make sure that person is seen by the right person at the right time. But it also gives the reassurance for the navigator that they're not out in front of their skis, right? this is within their ability to have conversation and navigate with someone. And so what we do is we train on tools so that we are prepared to ask the right questions, listen differently, have resources to be able to help an individual address some of those critical needs. So it really is, one, being much more attuned to be able to identify early warning signs. And then two, if this is beyond that navigator's ability, they are able to send them to the right provider.
Got it. So let's talk about that a little bit. What are the resources that are available? Because I'm sure congregations are probably saying, well, we'd love to get involved in this and help with this, but we don't have professionals in this space and that type of thing. What do you help provide those types of resources to the congregations that are involved in this?
So a big piece of what we do is help connect the dots, right, and create awareness of those resources that exist in community. And I think that's been one of the most striking things in this work that I think has surprised me the most, just because most of my work has been in the world of nonprofits, whether that's operating in trenches with them and or funding them. I made an assumption that most people know what services are available, what initiatives this city offers. And it's been so apparent to me that churches and faith communities are very disconnected from those resources. And so a couple of things happen. Either in absence of knowing the resources exist, faith communities have leaned in and they've created their own infrastructure to address the problem, and or have just simply begun to network between themselves to create solutions. And so one of the things that we've been very intentional about doing is creating learning opportunities and bringing together either panels of nonprofits or system providers to get in front of our churches to, one, share with them the information around their services, but two, it's been so amazing to see system providers look at an audience of 50 to 80 congregations and say, wow, you guys are a critical mass. I realize I can't do this work without you in community. And so it's been this really beautiful bridging of the ecosystem, so to speak, right? And I don't know that we set out as that as part of the intended consequence. It's just been this lovely thing that's transformed, right? Mm-hmm. How community connects with each other to address mental well-being.
Yeah, so a little happy accident there. So if somebody's listening, Becca, and they're like, wow, this sounds like a neat organization, or boy, I wish my church offered, something along these lines. Like I'm part of a congregation that's in fact, was part of your pilot program, and they want to reach out. What's the best way for folks to reach out to you all?
So it's the congregationalcollective.org, literally, congregationalcollective.org. And there's an information portal. That message will come directly to me. That is one way. Another is they can email me. It's rdbrune@congregationalcollective.org.
And Brune, just for those that are, it's Brune.
Yes, it is. And would love to engage and answer questions. We have a couple of things. We've got a couple of tiers. We work very intentionally with 18 congregations that are part of this Templeton Foundation Tapestry of Care initiative. But there are other opportunities for congregations or churches to engage in our trainings, and they're free of charge. We have a series of trainings that we offer. Spiritual first aid is one. We offer a sanctuary. We offer companionship. So quarterly, usually 4 times a year, we'll have trainings, and we have anywhere from 50. We had a recent one where we had 82 people. But it's been great, and there's opportunities to plug in no matter what congregation you are or kind of where you're at in this journey, even if it's just to have a conversation and maybe begin to explore.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. So, 82 folks. So, word is spreading.
Word is spreading. Yeah. I have a interesting story. One of our partners is the UT Health The Now Clinic, and the Texas Tribune had come down to San Antonio and did a really a wonderful report or story on the partnership between the UT Health and Harvard Medical School and the Congregational Collective, and it was published and it ran in the paper, and it talked about the work that we're doing and very specifically how congregations are leaning into the space, early intervention and upstream. Well, about 2 weeks later, I get a call from the UT Health, from the Now Clinic, and one of the directors there said, I think we've done something here, and I don't know, this we need to think about this. I might need to hire more staff. I said, well, what happened? And they said, well, somebody in community got a hold of the article, read it, and they called the Now Clinic for the list of churches. And when I asked the question, well, why do you need the list of churches? This gentleman said, well, because I want to go get services. And so it's just this really beautiful democracy or democratizing the way that healthcare is delivered, in the sense that this individual who was seeking mental health services called the Now Clinic, not for crisis care, but for services at a church to address his mental well-being.
That's exactly what you're looking to do.
Yep.
I'm sure you have people who ask, well, why are you limiting what you're doing to work within the faith community and that type of thing? How are you partnering with secular organizations and that type of thing? I mean, obviously a lot of the providers like the Now Clinic and those are not faith specific. So, but what was it that made you kind of lean this direction and lean in on the faith communities? So
that's where our roots started, that the H.E. Butt Foundation's roots started, right? And it's what we know. And I think that also we know, right, data and research tells us that 80% of individuals will go to their faith leader. And if we really want to make a difference and an impact in addressing mental well-being at the community level, what better place to go? And that same research tells us that 20% of the clergy and congregational or leadership do not know how to address it. And so it's kind of the perfect storm, right? There's a critical mass where people are going to seek help for mental well-being, but that same critical mass doesn't know and is not equipped to be able to address it effectively. And so it's a great opportunity to lean into that space and help communities address a very important issue, right? Before it becomes a crisis, before it goes into the jail system or the emergency room.
Yeah, again, that upstream notion is so critical on so many of these different issues. Would I be correct in saying that if somebody is interested in this, they could get a list of the congregations that you support on your website, so they could reach out directly to them if need be, correct?
Yes. Many of the congregations that we work with are standing up ministry teams and initiatives that have a variety of different services. They actually have classes, co-hosting classes together. So yes, and they all look different. I mean, I think the best way to do it also is if they want to reach out to us, we can help navigate them too.
And what would your message be to somebody who kind of feels like they're not sure that they've got an issue, but they just know something's not quite right?
Yeah. I think that is the first place that you start, right? The very sense that something's not quite right, is this, yourself better than anybody else. And I think, leaning out and leaning to your support network, a friend, a family member. We have a helpline here in San Antonio. NAMI has an incredible warm line that, you can have a human talk to you, right? I mean, they tell us that, recovery in the space of mental well-being it's all about social networks and connection. And so whatever that looks like for that person, right? Reaching out to talk to someone, whether it's a friend, a family member, a coworker, or someone on the warm line, that's where you start.
Yeah, and another resource that's out there, and a past guest on this show is the San Antonio Community Resource Directory, Sacred. They have they have a directory of organizations that provide help, cross-referenced by, zip codes and areas of expertise and a whole bunch of different things as well.
So Sacred actually, we partner well with Sacred. They actually have an ability to isolate all the mental health providers and services. So that also is an incredible resource.
Very much so. So what did we not – well, let me take a step back and just talk about – you mentioned collaboration, and obviously you've, mentioned other organizations that you work with and that type of thing, and kind of talk a little bit about, how you're able to come together with organizations to provide services and not like step on each other's toes and feel like it's a, competitive situation or that type of thing.
Yeah. So that's been one of the exciting pieces of this work is this watching the relationships form between congregations, churches, and nonprofit providers. It's also been exciting to see that as nonprofit leaders and providers and health system providers lean into community, they begin to learn from community and rethink how they're delivering services. And a really good example is, UT Health was so excited to be engaged with us, the Now Clinic. They're like, Becca, we've always wanted to work with faith communities. We just didn't know how to. And so it's been wonderful to kind of build this bridge. And they have a couple of trainings that we lean into them and they provide for us. And they've modified those based on the fact that they're learning to do this work differently. Harvard Medical School, who would have thought, right? Harvard provides some of the training and, my counterpart at Harvard's like, hey, yeah, we've only ever done this virtually. I'm like, well, that's not going to work in South Texas. You need to come down. And I think John's been down 6 times now in less than 12 months, right? And again, I know that seems really small and simple, but community is really helping to reshape how providers and the world of secular delivery systems lean into community and partner. And so it's been really wonderful to kind of see that, and I think it's been very gratifying for our churches to see the value they bring in being part of this solution.
Yeah, no, that's exciting. And I bet the Harvard guy wants to come down a lot in January and February. But okay, so what have I not asked you about that you want to make sure that you had a chance to talk about today?
Yeah, I think by no means have we arrived, right? We're still figuring this out. A big piece of what we're doing is the data and the research, really wanting to identify what are those critical levers that have to be pulled to make this work, right? And, what we do know is it's about culture. It's about leadership being engaged. It's about connectivity in community, right? And so part of what we're doing is really being able to identify, what are best practices so that as more faith communities lean into this space, because they're already in it, right? They don't have to start from scratch, and there's learnings that we can share. And also just begin to be able to show the value that congregations and churches bring into this space as part of the delivery system, right? And so that is the exciting part.
I know that's the part that excites me, is to be able to see congregations as a focal point of that, and being able to leverage, obviously, their relationships with their congregants, but also the sense of community and that type of thing that you get within there. So that's certainly, just from a personal aspect, the thing that excites me probably the most about what you're doing. And then, of course, we know of the great need for these services. We know that mental health is an issue of great concern in terms of one of the biggest needs that remains unmet within social services in general, and so many of the other types of things that pop up, homelessness, incarceration, those types of things can get traced back to a mental health state or a mental health need that has not been met.
I use this example a lot. This isn't to replace, right? This work isn't to replace the current delivery system. And it's certainly, it is not to address acute or more severe mental health issues in community. But what it is saying is, look, we've been investing millions and millions of dollars into a system that clearly is missing people. And so what this is just suggesting is, let's try something different. Let's innovate something different and see if it works, right? This is not an either or. It's really stepping in with an and proposition to say, how do we lean into community to figure out how to do this work differently? Let's just give it a try, right? And, I think we're onto something. And we're just looking to be able to be part of this solution and do it in such a way that it's not about leaving your faith at the door, but, it's your faith and mental well-being, not one or the other, if that makes sense. Absolutely.
Well, we're certainly supporting you and hoping that the results continue to be good here. And then when, every congregation in the country has this, then you've expanded into every market in the U.S., then you can just remember us and you can come back and be on the podcast again. Okay. So on behalf of Philanthropy SA, I want to thank Becca Brune, the CEO of the Congregational Collective, for being our guest today. Thank you so much. And I just want to remind everybody to do well so you can do good.
Thank you for joining us at Philanthropy SA. We hope you found something to inspire you during today's conversation. If you know organizations and people who are making an impact in the community, we would love to hear about it. Until next time, do well so you can do good.